Thanksgiving dinner, my MIL spat in my face and started arguing about my late husband's inheritance. I cooked a 5-hour dinner for his family, a simple way to show gratitude for my late husband. She then took my autistic son by the hand and screamed, "This little freak is not our family." I immediately grabbed her wrist, whispered one sentence, and she learned who I truly was. It happened between the turkey and the pie, in front of 19 people. The dining room of the big house in Westmont was packed the way Carol liked it. Kovach aunts and cousins, shoulder to shoulder. Her 2 best friends from St. Stephen's Parish. My sister-in-law Brittany, propping her phone against the gravy boat to film the table for the memories. In the middle of it all sat the turkey I had brined for 14 hours on Carol's good platter, surrounded by 11 dishes I had cooked with my own hands. I had walked into that kitchen at 6 in the morning. Nobody helped me. Nobody offered. Carol waited until the plates were cleared for pie. Then she stood up, tapped her wine glass with a butter knife, like she was toasting at a wedding, and said, "Since the whole family is finally in one room, we are going to settle what Aaron left behind. Tonight, before dessert." I kept my hands in my lap. I said quietly, "Not at the table, Carol." She came around the table so fast her chair tipped. Quick pause before we continue. I'm Clara, the woman behind this channel. I write these stories because I love that little moment when strangers from different places end up feeling the same thing. If this one already pulled you in, stay with me. It goes deeper from here. She came around the table so fast her chair tipped. She put her face an inch from mine and told me I was nobody, that I had trapped her son, that everything Aaron ever had came from this family and was going back to this family. I didn't move, I didn't blink, so she pulled her head back and spat in my face. I heard my son before I heard the room. Eli was at the corner of the table, in his blue headphones, the ones that keep the world from getting too loud for him, lining up his 3 green beans, end to end, the way he always does. Carol grabbed his hand and yanked him up out of his chair so hard the headphones fell and bounced under the table, and she screamed at him, at me, at all 19 of them. "This little freak is not our family." Nobody moved. 19 grown adults, and the only sound in that room was Brittany's phone tipping over onto the tablecloth, still recording. I wiped my face with Carol's cloth napkin and folded it once. I bent down and picked my son's headphones up off her floor. I set them back over his ears, gently, the way I do it every single morning. And then I closed my hand around Carol's wrist, the wrist of the hand that was still squeezing my son's, and I felt her try to pull away, and I did not let her. I leaned in until my mouth was at her ear, and I said one sentence, 11 words, too quiet for anyone else in that room to hear. Carol's face went the color of her tablecloth. She let go of Eli's hand like it had burned her. Her eyes went straight down the table to her husband, to Roger, sitting at the head of it, and Roger looked at his plate and would not look back at her. And that, right there, was the moment Carol Kovach understood that whatever I had just whispered, it was true, and her own husband already knew it. To understand those 11 words, and why Roger couldn't lift his eyes, you have to go back 3 months, to Labor Day, in the backyard of that same house. Labor Day at Carol's is an institution in that family. Folding tables on the lawn, Roger at the grill in the apron he's owned since the 90s, coolers of pop for the kids, and Carol moving from table to table like a woman inspecting her kingdom. I came with a potato salad, and my son, the same as I had for 12 years. I was 2 years a widow by then. Eli was 8. Carol waited until the aunts were settled with their paper plates, because Carol never says anything important without an audience. Then she stood at the end of the long table, put her hand on my shoulder like we were posing for a picture, and announced, Natalie is doing Thanksgiving this year. All of it. The whole dinner here for the whole family. She smiled around at everyone. She owes this family that much. Wouldn't you say? The aunts murmured the way they always did. Somebody said it would be so nice. And then Carol leaned down, still smiling, still loud enough for the table to hear, and added, "It's the least she can do, considering she's sitting on Aaron's money while his own mother clips coupons." There it was. The insurance. My husband had been gone 17 months, and his mother had spent 16 of them telling anyone who would listen that his life insurance was Kovac money and that it needed to come home. She said it at the church coffee hour. She said it at the hairdresser. Now she was saying it over potato salad, with her hand on my shoulder. I said, "I'll cook, Carol." 4 words, and I let the rest go past me. She patted my shoulder twice, like a woman patting a horse, and moved on. 10 minutes later, I looked up and couldn't find my son. Eli had been at the kids' table with the cousins, doing fine, doing his quiet thing. Carol had moved his plate. She'd set it on the back porch steps off away from everyone and steered him over to it by the shoulders. "He's calmer alone," she told me before I could open my mouth. "The other children need to be able to relax." I didn't argue with her. I want to be honest about that. Because for a long time, I was ashamed of it. I didn't argue. I just picked up my own plate, walked across the yard past 3 tables of his relatives, and sat down next to my son on the steps. I cut his hamburger into the 4 pieces he likes. We ate on the porch steps of his grandmother's house, like 2 guests who had wandered in off the street. And I watched Carol tell a story to the aunts with both hands, and I memorized it. One person came over, Aunt Sharon, Roger's older sister, a retired school nurse who says about 1 sentence an hour, crossed the whole yard with 2 plates of sheet cake, set them down on the step between Eli and me, and stood there a second looking back at the party. "Nice out here," she said. "It's quieter." That was all. She went back to her table. It wasn't a rescue, but somebody had seen us and had walked the length of that yard to say so, and I filed that away too. You need to know who Aaron was, so you know exactly what his mother was stepping on. Aaron Kovac was a rigger, bridge cranes, at the steel plant down in Franklin. 3rd generation in the mills around Johnstown. Big, quiet hands. Wrote everything in block capitals like a man labeling a fuse box. He courted me with recipe cards, if you can believe that. He'd cook something for me on a Sunday, and then write the recipe out on an index card in those block letters, and stick it to my refrigerator. Like he was leaving proof he'd been there. 14 years of those cards. He taught Eli to line up dominoes. He never once, not one time, made our son feel like a problem to be managed. In March of 2024, there was an accident at the plant. A lift that should have been routine wasn't. They told me he didn't suffer, which is the thing they tell you. He was 41. The union had a life insurance policy on every man in that building. And that policy, the one Carol calls the inheritance, the one she chased across every table in Cambria County, exists because my husband died at work. That is the money his mother wanted to divide before the pie. And me. I'm Natalie. I grew up in a trailer down in the flats by the Conemaugh River, which Carol managed to mention one way or another at every family event for 12 years. To the Kovaches, I was the girl who got lucky. The girl who should be grateful, the girl who, after Aaron died, was sitting on their money. For work, I drive up to Ebensburg every morning to the courthouse. I'm a deputy clerk at the Cambria County Recorder of Deeds. The family knows this the way you know weather in another state. Natalie files papers, is how Carol put it once. That's me. I file papers. Here is what none of them knew. That whole long Labor Day afternoon, while I ate on the steps with my son. In October of 2021, a deed crossed my counter at the recorder's office. I stamped it, indexed it, and filed it with my own hands, the same as I've done 10,000 times. Except this one had a name on it I knew. My husband stood on the other side of my counter that morning with his ball cap in his hands, and he asked me to do something he'd never asked before, to keep it between us. Not a lie, he said, just a kindness nobody needed to know about. I kept that secret through 3 Thanksgivings. I kept it through his funeral with his mother sobbing on my shoulder. I was still keeping it 17 months later, while she told a yard full of relatives that I owed this family. The Sunday after Labor Day, the phone calls started, and then the dinners. That's when Carol first brought out the folder, the one with my name already typed on the front. The Sunday dinners were Carol's idea, pitched to the family as healing. "We need to be together more," she told the aunts on the phone. For Erin, what she meant was, I need Natalie at my table once a week, where I can work on her. The first Sunday, the folder was sitting next to the mashed potatoes before we even said grace. Manila with a white label typed across the front. Kovac Family Agreement. Natalie. Carol let it sit there through the whole meal like a loaded thing, and when the plates were cleared, she slid it across the table to me with 2 fingers. "Donna's son put it together," she said. "He does contracts for the dealership. He's practically a lawyer. It's all very fair." I opened it because I wanted to see the number. It was all typed out clean, like a menu. Erin's life insurance, itemized. 60% to Roger and Carol Kovac, in recognition of a lifetime of family support. 25% to Brittany, toward the establishment of her business. 15% to be held for the child. The child, that's what my son was. In the paper his grandmother had drawn up about his father's death money. Eli wasn't at the table for this, because Eli was no longer allowed at the table. Starting that first Sunday, Carol set him a place in the kitchen, at the old card table by the pantry with a paper plate. "He's happier in there," she said. "He doesn't like our chatter." My son ate alone in his grandmother's kitchen, 12 feet and 1 wall away from his whole family, quietly building a fence around his food with cut-up pieces of bread. Every Sunday, I sat where I could see him through the doorway. Every Sunday, Carol got up and closed the kitchen door, and I got up and opened it. "I'll read it," I said, and put the folder in my bag. "There's nothing to read," Carol said, still smiling. "There's just family and whether you're part of it." I didn't sign. I didn't argue either. I'd learned that from 12 years of her table. An argument was fuel, and my silence was the only thing in that house she couldn't use. So I said the dinner was lovely, and I drove my son home. And behind me, I found out later, the phone call started before my taillights cleared the corner. By the middle of September, half of St. Stephen's had heard the story. I know because I was standing in the church basement at coffee hour, holding a styrofoam cup, when Carol's friend Donna put a hand on my arm, soft, sympathetic, the way you'd touch a sick person, and said, "We're all praying you do right by Carol, honey. It's hard on her. You sitting on Erin's money while she suffers. Sitting on the money." Carol's phrase, word for word, coming back at me out of another woman's mouth, in a church basement over a tray of pierogies. That's how I learned my mother-in-law had spent the summer campaigning. Not asking me. Building a jury. A week later, I got to watch the campaign live. I was at the Giant Eagle up in Richland after work, 2 carts back in the checkout line, when I realized the woman up front holding up the line was Carol. Coupons out on the belt, counting them into the cashier's hand one at a time like communion wafers, narrating. "You do what you have to at my age, honey. My son passed last year and left a good insurance, but his wife keeps every penny of it. His own mother clipping coupons. The cashier made the sound you make at strangers' sad stories. The man between us shifted his feet. And then Carol turned with her receipt, saw me standing there with my frozen lasagna and my gallon of milk, and did not miss one beat. "Oh, Natalie, sweetheart, say hi to the baby." And she wheeled past me out the doors, chin up, absolutely delighted. Because the scene played better with me in it. I stood in that line and paid for my groceries with my ears ringing. And here's what you have to understand about that money, the money I was supposedly sitting on. It was in an account I hadn't touched except twice, once for the funeral, once for the specialist in Pittsburgh, who finally got Eli's school plan right. I drove a 9-year-old Impala. I packed my lunch every day for the drive to Ebensburg. But she's sitting on it is a better story than she's saving it for a disabled little boy. And Carol always knew which story a room would carry. Brittany, meanwhile, was already spending her 25%. My sister-in-law was 33, between jobs the way she was always between jobs, and that fall she had found her calling, a nail salon. There was an empty storefront on Franklin Street downtown, and Brittany toured it the way brides tour churches. She posted pictures. She had a name picked out, and a font for the name. At the second Sunday dinner, she passed her phone around the table showing the aunts a mood board, and Carol beamed like the money was already in the register. And I sat there realizing something that actually frightened me. Carol had promised it to her. Out loud, to people. My signature was a formality in their heads. The deal was done at every table in Johnstown, except the one where I was sitting. The third Sunday of October, Carol decided to close. She invited the aunts, Sharon and Patty, Roger's sisters, plus Donna from church, plus Brittany, of course. A bigger table than usual, a roast, the good dishes. I should have smelled it. When the coffee came out, so did the folder, and this time there was a pen on top of it, a bank pen, with a chain still on it, which tells you everything about how this had been planned. Carol tapped the folder and looked around the table, gathering her audience, the way she gathered everything, and said, "Natalie's had a month with it. There's no reason this can't be finished tonight, in front of family, the way Aaron would have wanted." The way Aaron would have wanted. I looked at that pen on its little chain, and something in me finished a long, slow turn it had been making since Labor Day. I said, "No." Just the one word, into the middle of the table. Aunt Sharon's cup stopped halfway to her mouth. "Excuse me," Carol said. "I'm not signing it," I said. "Not tonight, not ever. That's Aaron's insurance, and it's going to raise Aaron's son. That's the whole conversation, Carol. There isn't another one." I want to tell you the room gasped, but the truth is worse. The room went carefully, deliciously quiet, the way rooms do when the show gets better than anyone hoped. Carol's smile stayed up an extra 2 seconds, disconnected from her eyes, and I watched her recalculate in front of 6 witnesses. "Well," she said sweetly, "I think grief has made you selfish." "Maybe," I said. "It's made me a lot of things." And I got up and got my son and his jacket from the kitchen, and we went home. That could have been the whole story right there, one hard no over coffee. It wasn't because of what the no crashed into. Carol had built the salon promise so high in front of so many people that my one word came down on it like a wrecking ball, and the first person crushed under it was her own daughter. Because Brittany, sweet, certain Brittany, had already signed a letter of intent on the Franklin Street storefront. She'd told the leasing agent the deposit was coming by November 1st. She'd told the girls she worked with at the beauty counter. She had, I found out, put the mood board on the salon's brand new Facebook page, Opening Spring 2027. On November 1st, there was no deposit because there was no money, because there had never been any money. There was only Carol's promise of my signature. The agent moved on to another tenant by the end of the week. And Brittany did not go quietly. She melted down in her mother's kitchen with Aunt Patty standing right there. And the sentence she screamed is the sentence Patty repeated to Sharon, who repeated it to everyone. "You told me it was done, Mom. You told everyone it was done." You told everyone it was done. For 16 months, Carol had run this family on one story: that Aaron's money was Kovash money, already as good as home, just waiting on a formality named Natalie. And now, in her own kitchen, in front of her own sister-in-law, her own daughter had announced that the story was a story. The aunts didn't say anything to Carol's face, but the temperature changed. I could feel it the next Sunday. A half-second of hesitation before the murmured agreements. Sharon's eyes finding me down the table with something new in them. Not warmth, exactly. Curiosity. Carol felt it too. Women like Carol can feel a room shift the way sailors feel weather. And a person who has lost a little control does not loosen her grip. She tightens it. She caught me at the door that Sunday, as I was zipping Eli into his coat. She was calm, which by then I knew was her most dangerous setting. "You're still doing Thanksgiving," she said. It wasn't a question. "Everything from scratch, done properly. Bring Aaron's recipe box next week." She reached out and tucked a piece of hair behind my ear, a gesture from 12 years of grandmothering me in public, and smiled. "If you're going to cook in my house, you'll cook like a Kovac. Those recipes belong here anyway." I drove home with my son humming in the back seat, and Aaron's block capitals in my head. Brine 14 HRS. And I understood, in a cold filing clerk sort of way, that she had just told me exactly what she was going to take next. I need to tell you about the recipe box, because everything that happened at that Thanksgiving table runs through it. It's a tin box, dark green, dented on one corner from the time it fell off our counter the year Eli was born. Inside are 14 years of index cards in Aaron's block capitals. He wrote recipes the way he rigged loads. Exact, all caps, no wasted words. Chicken paprikash. Don't rush the onions. Haluski. Butter more than feels right. And on top, worn soft at the edges because he pulled it every November. The turkey card. Brine 14. HRS. No shortcuts. Calm down. It will be fine. That last line was for me, because the first year I cooked a turkey for his family, I cried in the bathroom with the timer going. He knew. He wrote it on the card so I'd see it every year after. Half those recipes were his grandmother's, sure. Old Kovac cooking from Cambria City from the parish picnics. But the cards were his. His hand, his jokes, his grease stains. After the funeral, on the bad nights, I'd take the box out and just read them, because block capitals don't fade the way voices do. Carol asked for the box twice, sweetly, at 2 Sunday dinners. The third time, she didn't ask. It was the Sunday I'd brought it to plan the Thanksgiving menu. My mistake, I know that now. We had the cards spread on her dining room table, and I stepped into the kitchen to check on Eli. And when I came back, the cards were stacked, squared, and back in the tin. And the tin was sitting on the top of Carol's china hutch, behind the glass, next to her dead mother's teacups. Placed, displayed, hers. "I'll keep it here," Carol said, not even turning around from the hutch. "Kovac recipes stay in the Kovac house. You understand." And then with the little knife she kept for special occasions, "You can copy out what you need for the dinner. Print's easier for you anyway, isn't it? Coming from your people." Coming from my people. Trailer people, she meant. People who don't have things to hand down. I stood there with my heart going and did the math I had learned to do in that house. what it would cost to fight her for a tin box in front of her family, with my son in the next room listening for the sound of my voice going wrong. 3 weeks before, I had to cook a holiday dinner in her kitchen. She had picked a thing she knew I couldn't grab back without becoming, in front of everyone, exactly what she'd spent 12 years saying I was. So I didn't grab it back. I said, "Sure, Carol." And later, while she walked Donna out to her car, I opened the hutch, slid one card out of the tin, and put it in my purse. The turkey card. Brine 14, HRS. Calm down. It will be fine. If she ever noticed it was gone, she never said so. She had the box. She didn't know what was in it any more than she knew what was in her own house. The box came back at me one more time before the porch, and it came back wearing Carol's apron. The very next Sunday, she served Haleski, from Aaron's card, obviously, the tin now living in her hutch, and stood over the dish while Donna took her first bite and announced to the table, "Old family recipe. Everything Aaron knew in a kitchen, he learned standing on a chair next to me." Donna said it was wonderful. It wasn't wonderful. She'd skimped the butter, because Carol has skimped butter her whole life, and butter, more than feels right, was the whole point of the card. It was a joke between Aaron and a dead grandmother, and you had to have loved one of them to obey it. Eli took one bite, put his fork down, and quietly built a wall of bread around the noodles. My son can't tell you what's missing from a dish, but he always knows when something is pretending to be a thing it isn't. Carol watched him wall off her haluski and told the table, "See, he won't eat normal food." I looked at that tin behind the glass, holding 14 years of my husband's hand, being quoted by a woman who couldn't read it, and I ate every bite on my plate, so I wouldn't say something I wasn't ready to say yet. It was Roger who cracked first. I don't think anyone else even caught it. This was the same evening, out on the porch. I was carrying Eli's booster seat to the car, and Roger followed me out with a foil plate of leftovers, the way he always did. Roger's apologies were always food, handed over in silence at the end of the night. 68 years old, 40 of them in the mills, a man who could rewire a house and could not finish a sentence in front of his wife. He put the foil plate on my back seat and stood there working his jaw. And then he said quietly, "She shouldn't have taken the box. After what that boy's father did for this how..." The porch light snapped on. Carol, in the doorway, arms folded. "Roger, Donna's leaving. Come say goodbye." He shut my car door for me and went. And I stood in that driveway with my keys in my hand, replaying it. After what that boy's father did for this house, not for this family, for this house. Roger knew something specific, and it lived in that word. And his wife had just cut the sentence off at the knees, without even knowing what she was cutting, or exactly knowing. One of the two. I drove home that night with the first cold little question sitting in my chest. Not an answer. A question with a shape to it. The answer walked up to me 2 weeks later, at my son's school, wearing perfume and holding a paper cup of cider. The fall festival is Eli's favorite thing his school does. Hay bales in the gym, a pumpkin table, teachers in flannel. Crowded and loud, so he wears the blue headphones. And every teacher in that building knows what they are and doesn't blink. Eli had a job that night. He'd been chosen to hand out the raffle tickets at the door, because handing each person exactly one ticket is a thing my son does better than any child in Pennsylvania. He stood at that door in his headphones, giving out tickets one at a time, precise as a bank teller, proud as I have ever seen him. Carol came because grandmothers come. For 20 minutes she worked the gym like it was her gym, and then I watched her wash up at the cider table next to Eli's teacher, Miss Hartley, and I drifted close with my paper cup, and I heard my mother-in-law say it. "You're all so patient with him. He's a difficult child. We say it in the family. We can say it. His mother babies him. That's half of it. Those headphones. A little laugh into the cider. In my day, a child like that got told to toughen up, and they did. Miss Hartley, God bless her forever, said, "Eli's one of my favorite kids in this building," in a voice with a wall in it, and excused herself. Carol didn't even register the wall. She'd already turned to the woman on her other side, a mom from the PTA. And that's when she said the thing she actually came to say, the thing I heard over the noise of 100 kids, like it was said through a microphone. "We're doing a big family Thanksgiving at our place in Westmont. Oh, the house has been in the Kovach family 60 years. It goes to my daughter after us. It's all in the will, all set. That's how we do it. Family things stay in the family. It's all in the will, all set." I stood in that gymnasium with cider going cold in my hand, and the cold little question in my chest snapped together with everything else, after what that boy's father did for this house, and became something with edges. Because here is what I knew that nobody at that cider table knew. In 2021, that house in Westmont had been in trouble. Real trouble, bank trouble. The kind that ends up eventually as paper in front of somebody like me. I knew Roger had gotten badly upside down after his retirement. There'd been a loan against the house, and then there hadn't been payments. In the spring of 2021, the family had one bad scare. Carol referred to it exactly once in my hearing, at the time, as a mix-up with the bank that Roger straightened out, and the family never spoke of it again. Roger straightened it out. That was the story. That was always the story. And in October of 2021, my husband stood at my counter at the Recorder of Deeds with his ball cap in his hands and a deed to record, and asked me to keep it between us. Carol was planning to leave her daughter a house. She was standing in a grade school gym, over cider, giving away a thing she did not own. And she didn't know. Roger knew and had swallowed it for 5 years, and it was leaking out of him one cut-off sentence at a time. But Carol, who ran that family like a county, who had spat the word freak within a foot of my son's headphones, Carol had no idea what was recorded in deed book, in my building, in my county, under my hands. I could have pulled the book that Monday. It's public record. Any citizen can walk in and ask, and I work 60 feet from the shelf. I didn't. I'm asking you to understand something about the woman I was that fall. I had spent 12 years not reaching for things. I told myself it wasn't my secret, it was Aaron's. And Aaron was gone, and peace for my son was worth more than being right. Then came November, and the 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, and Carol taught me, in one dinner, that there was no peace on the menu at all. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, Carol called a planning dinner. That was the night I hit bottom in that family, and my son hit it with me. It was a school night, which she knew, and mandatory, which she didn't say but didn't have to. Just us and them, Carol, Roger, Brittany, me, Eli. And it started with a legal pad, because everything Carol did that fall had paper in it. She'd written out the entire Thanksgiving in her looping hand, every dish, every timing, and she slid it in front of me at her kitchen table, like a foreman handing over a work order. Turkey, brined. 2 stuffings, because Aunt Sharon can't have sausage. The paprikash noodles from the box. From Aaron's cards, she meant. The cards in her hutch. 3 pies. Rolls from scratch. Not store rolls, we're not that kind of family. 22 people sit down at 2 o'clock sharp. "You'll want to be here by 6 in the morning, Carol said, ticking down the list with her pen. "I'll have the kitchen open." I looked at that pad and did honest math. That wasn't a menu you cook and also attend. That was catering. "And when do Eli and I eat?" I asked. Not fighting, just asking. Carol didn't even look up from the pad. "You two will eat after once everything's served and settled. It's easier on everybody. He can't sit through a long dinner anyway, and you'll be up and down serving regardless. She flipped the page. It's how it was done when I was young. The cook eats after. The cook eats after. There it was, said out loud at last, after 12 years of being walked toward it. I wasn't the widow of her son coming to Thanksgiving. I was staff, and my son, their only grandchild, the last of Aaron in this world, was a scheduling problem to be fed in the kitchen after the family finished. Roger's fork stopped. I watched it stop. I watched him look at his wife and open his mouth, and I watched 40 years of habit close it for him. He reached over and put a roll on Eli's plate instead. That was Roger, whole and entire. A man who fed you what he couldn't say. I should have walked out then. I've replayed it 100 times, but you don't understand what it costs to walk out until you've stood where I stood, with a kid who needs routines you're about to detonate in the last family he has on his father's side. So I said, "Fine, Carol," and hated myself and stayed. And because I stayed, I was still sitting at that table 10 minutes later when she went after the headphones. Eli had been doing beautifully for Eli at the end of a school day, at his grandmother's loud table. He had his blue headphones on, and his dinosaurs lined up next to his plate, nose to tail, and he was eating his buttered noodles in his pattern. And he was not bothering one living soul. Carol watched him over her glasses for a while, the way she'd been watching him all fall, like he was a stain that kept coming back. Then she put down her pen, reached across the table, and lifted the headphones straight off his head. "Not at Thanksgiving," she said, folding them shut like she was confiscating a toy. "Not in front of the whole family with people taking pictures. It's time he got used to it. In this house, he learns to sit like a person. Like a person." Eli's hands came up to where the headphones had been and stayed there, pressed flat over his ears. And he started the low hum he does when the world gets too big, and his legs started going under the table. I was around that table before I knew I was up. I took the headphones out of Carol's hand. She let them go with a little laugh, a little, "Oh, here we go," for Brittany's benefit. And I put them back on my son's head, and I knelt down next to him with my hand on his back, counting his breathing with him the way we practice, 4 in, 4 out. And over my shoulder to Brittany, in the voice she used for pronouncements, Carol said, "You see, she makes him worse. A boy learns to be a man by being expected to act like one. He's 8, I didn't say. He is 8 years old, and his father is dead, I didn't say. I got him calm and I got him his coat. And I told Carol we'd see her Thanksgiving morning. Because, and I want you to hear the whole shape of my defeat that night, I was still coming. I was still going to cook her dinner. Even then. While I was zipping Eli's coat, Carol delivered her last item of business, casually, to the room in general, the way officials read announcements. Friday after Thanksgiving, 10 a.m., we're all sitting down with Gary Whitcomb's office about the estate. It's arranged. Natalie, you'll want to be there. It's about what Aaron owed this family. Gary says there are avenues. Avenues. She'd hired a lawyer. Failing my signature, she'd found a man in an office park who'd take her money and write me letters about my dead husband's life insurance. She said it in front of my son the way you'd mention a dentist appointment. And then she smiled and told Eli, "Grandma will see you at Thanksgiving, sweetheart," in the voice she kept for witnesses. I got us out. Brittany, for the record, had been at that table the whole evening with her thumbs going on her phone, and before I'd even gotten Eli's seatbelt buckled, I found out what the thumbs had been doing. She had photographed her mother's legal pad, my work order, every dish I was to cook alone, cropped it pretty and posted it. "Hosting season is here. My Thanksgiving menu this year. This is why I love making these stories. People think silence means weakness until the proof is already in the room. Stay with me. We're right at that point." my Thanksgiving menu this year. So much work, but family is everything. By morning, it had 41 likes and a row of comments from women I'd fed at that table for a decade. "You're amazing, Britt. Superwoman. Save me a plate." Aunt Patty commented a heart. I read it in the school drop-off line, and I'll be honest about which part got me. It wasn't the stolen credit. It was my. One little word, doing what that whole family had been doing to me for 12 years, taking a thing I made with my hands and putting their name on it while I was still holding it. And I thought, driving down the hill that night, with the valley lights coming up through the windshield, that at least I'd cataloged every cost that dinner was going to bill me. I was wrong. The worst thing had already happened, back in that house. And I didn't know it yet because the worst thing was a thing my son had heard through a door. Here's what I pieced together later. While I'd been in the bathroom helping Eli wash paprikash off his hands, his routine, every visit, water, the temperature he likes, Carol and Brittany had been 11 feet away in the kitchen with the door not quite shut. And Carol, unloading to her daughter about her evening, about her Thanksgiving, about her burdens, had said it. The word. The one she'd been circling all fall. Brittany told Aunt Patty the whole conversation weeks later, the way Brittany eventually told everyone everything, and by then I knew the word firsthand anyway. The whole county did. But my son heard it first through a kitchen door, at 8 years old, with his hands still wet. He didn't say anything that night. That's the thing about my boy that people like Carol will never understand. He hears everything, holds everything, and brings it to you only when he's turned it over enough times to need help with it. It took him 4 days. We were in his room on a Sunday night. The one Sunday that fall with no dinner at Carol's. Glory, hallelujah. Doing the going to bed list. Teeth, dinosaurs, on the shelf in order, lamp, book. And in the dark after the book, in the small flat voice he uses for enormous things, my son said, "Mom, what's a freak?" I kept my hand moving on his hair. 4 in, 4 out. I asked him where he'd heard that word, and he told me. Through the door, at Grandma's, in Grandma's voice, and had turned it over for 4 days, and had figured out enough. "I think it means me," he said. Not crying. Reporting. My son reported to me, factually in the dark, that his grandmother had a word for him. And then he asked me if it was true. I told him the truth. I told him freak is a word small people use for big hearts, and that he was the best thing his father ever built, and that Daddy had written that down actually, on paper. And someday I'd show him. And I sat in the hallway outside his door until midnight, on the floor, in the dark, and I did not cry. And something that had been bending in me for 12 years did not bend anymore. It went the other way. It went hard. People talk about rock bottom like it's a place you fall to. It isn't. It's a place you stand up in. Monday morning, I dropped my son at school, watched him walk in under his backpack, and then I drove up Route 219 to Ebensburg, to the courthouse, to my counter, except I didn't stop at my counter. I walked past it back into the records room, to the shelf I could find blindfolded, and I pulled down Deed Book 2021 October. My hands were steady. That's what I remember noticing, after that whole rotten fall, standing in the quiet, with 60 years of Cambria County's paper around me. My hands were finally perfectly steady. I want to be clear about what I did in that records room, because it matters. I didn't go looking for a surprise. I knew what was on that page. I had known for 5 years. What I went looking for that Monday morning was certainty in a form Carol Kovat could hold in her 2 hands. But standing there with the book open, I let myself go back to the day the paper was born because I'd been keeping that day in a drawer of my own for 5 years, and it was time to take it out and look at it. October of 2021. A Tuesday, mid-morning, slow counter. I look up and my own husband is standing there in line behind a title searcher in his work jacket, holding his ball cap in both hands like a man at a viewing. Aaron never came to my work. I thought someone had died. And he slides a folder across my counter of all the counters in Pennsylvania, and says, "Don't be mad." Inside was a sheriff's deed. I do this for a living. So one look told me the whole story the family never told. The house in Westmont, his parents' house, had gone all the way through. Not a mix-up with the bank. A foreclosure, finished, advertised, auctioned, sold on the courthouse steps 60 feet from where I was standing, 3 weeks earlier. Roger had lost the house, all the way lost it. And the buyer, standing at the sale with a cashier's check built out of 2 years of doubles, night differentials, and every dollar we'd been calling our someday money. The buyer was my husband. And the name on the deed wasn't even his. He'd had a lawyer up the street put it straight into a trust, the Eli Aaron Kovach Trust. Our son, 4 years old that fall, owned his grandmother's house, and his grandmother was going to wake up every morning in it and never know. I asked Aaron the only question that mattered. Why the secret? And I'll tell you exactly what he said, leaning on my counter, turning that cap in his hands. Dad shook on it with me. If Mom finds out he lost the house, it kills him. She'd never let him up off the floor again, Nat. You know her, and if she finds out it's mine, she'll work on me till it's hers. And then it isn't Eli's anymore. He looked at me a long second and said, "It's not a lie. It's a roof staying where it is. Paper can just sit quiet and keep people safe. You know that better than anybody. Paper can sit quiet and keep people safe." The man rigged cranes and understood recording law better than half the attorneys who came through my line. I stamped my own son's deed that morning, and my husband put his cap back on and went to work the 3 to 11. He paid the property taxes every year after, quietly, and the insurance. When he died, the lawyer called me in, and I found out the rest. I was successor trustee. Me, the trailer girl. For 2 years since, I had signed the tax checks on the house Carol reigned in. Signed them at my kitchen table in Moxham, while she told the county I was sitting on Kovach money. You want to know what I was sitting on? Her roof. That's what I was sitting on, every day, in silence, because the silence was Aaron's, and I honored it even after it started cutting me. But Aaron's deal had been with a family that didn't spit on his wife. It had been for a mother who hadn't yet pulled headphones off his son's ears and demanded he sit like a person. And Aaron had said it himself, standing at my counter. Paper can sit quiet and keep people safe. Well, my son needed keeping safe. The paper was done sitting quiet. Here's what I did, and you'll notice what I didn't do. I didn't scream, I didn't post, I didn't call a single Kovach. I had Deb at the next window pull and certify the copies. I don't certify records I have a stake in. 12 years in that office taught me you keep your own hands off your own paper. Certified copy of the Sheriff's Deed, 2021. Certified copy of the Trust's Memorandum, recorded the same week. The one that names the trust and behind it in the lawyer's file, the trustee. 2 documents. That's all it ever needed to be. Aaron had built this thing the way he built everything. So simple, it couldn't fall over. On my lunch break, I sat in my car in the courthouse lot and made one phone call to Stephen Bartko, the attorney up Center Street who'd drawn the trust for Aaron and shepherded it to me when he died. I told him what had been happening in that house. All of it. The folder with my name typed on it. The lawyer meeting Carol had scheduled about avenues. The word my son heard through the door. Stephen was quiet a moment and then said, "As trustee, you've been more patient than the trust requires. What do you want to do?" And I said the sentence I'd been building since midnight on the hallway floor. Nothing cruel, everything true. Because I want you to understand what I was not going to do. I was not going to put two people in their late 60s out of a house 3 days before Christmas season. That's Carol's kind of math, and I wasn't raised by her. What I asked Stephen for was an occupancy agreement, the trust, in writing, formally letting Roger and Carol stay in the home, $1 a year with conditions. Ordinary, decent conditions. The kind you'd offer anybody, which was exactly the point. Nobody would be evicted. Somebody was going to learn in front of everybody, whose kindness she'd been living on for 5 years. Stephen drafted it that week. A cover letter from the trust's property manager, because a trust that owns a house has a manager, and it had been me all along. Another thing with my name on it that nobody in that family ever thought to wonder about. I picked up the packet on Tuesday before Thanksgiving. Deed, memorandum, agreement, letter. It all fit in one manila envelope, thinner than Carol's folder had been. Real things usually are thinner. And then, this is the part I didn't have to do and did on purpose, I obeyed her. To the letter. Wednesday night, my little kitchen in Moxham. I took the turkey card out of my purse and stood it against the sugar canister where Aaron used to stand it. Brine 14, HRS. No shortcuts. Calm down. It will be fine. I did the brine his way, salt and brown sugar and bay, in the big cooler, timed to the hour. I made his grandmother's dough for the rolls and set it to rise slow in the fridge. Eli sat at the table lining up cranberries, and I told him working, the parts of the story he could carry, that tomorrow might get loud, that we had a plan, that the plan had been Daddy's first. He asked if there would be pie. There would be pie. Around 8 that Wednesday night, a headlight swung into my driveway, and it was Roger. He stood on my little porch in Moxham holding Aaron's big roasting pan, the one that had migrated to Westmont after the funeral, like so many things, and said, "You'll want the good pan." That was the errand. A pan I could have picked up in the morning, driven 20 minutes down the hill in the dark to deliver. He came into the kitchen for exactly 1 minute and he saw it all. The brine cooler on the floor, the dough rising, and the turkey card propped against the sugar canister in his dead son's block capitals. He stood looking at that card a long time. Then he said, "Natalie, about the house," and stopped. The same cliff as the porch in October, and I stood very still because the manila envelope was 6 feet away in my tote, and this man was 1 sentence from making tomorrow unnecessary. He didn't get there. He put his hand flat on the counter next to the card, the way you'd touch a headstone, and said, "Your husband was the best man I ever knew. Whatever tomorrow turns into, you cook it his way." And he went back down my steps to his truck. Second time. 5 years. 2 almost sentences. I locked the door and checked the brine. Thursday, I was on Carol's doorstep at 6 sharp in the dark, with my coolers and my dough and my knives, and I cooked 5 hours in that woman's kitchen. And I want you to know I cooked it right. Not spite right. Aaron's way, no shortcuts. The paprikash onions taken slow. The rolls proofed on the radiator shelf the way the card said his grandmother did. Whatever happened at 2 o'clock, my son was going to watch his mother do the thing she'd promised, all the way. Well. Carol swanned through her kitchen every 40 minutes to inspect me, moved a trivet, told Donna on the phone that she'd finally gotten the dinner handled properly this year. I said nothing. 6 in, 6 out, basting. And by the front door, on the coat rack bench, sat my tote bag, the canvas one from the library fundraiser, dumpy and ordinary next to Carol's good wool coats, with a manila envelope inside it. And inside that envelope, my husband's block capitals sitting quiet on a signature page, 5 years patient, 1 hour from speaking. At 1:30, the cars started up the driveway. At 2, Carol rang her little bell and called her family to the table she believed was hers. So now you're back at the table where we started. And this time you're sitting where I sat. and you know everything I knew. 22 people, counting the kids. The turkey on the good platter, brined 14 hours, no shortcuts. Brittany's phone propped against the gravy boat, recording the memories. Eli at the corner of the table beside me, in his blue headphones. Because I'd put him beside me, moved the place card Carol had set for him by the kitchen door, and dared her with a look at 2:05 to say one word about it in front of the guests. She hadn't. She'd smiled her company smile and filed it, and I'd watched her file it. And I knew, the way you know weather, that it was coming back before pie. Dinner was, everyone said so. The best in years. Aunt Sharon asked for the roll recipe. Roger ate paprikash noodles with his head down and, once, without looking at me, said, "Tastes like my mother's." It was the longest sentence he'd said all day. The cook, you'll notice, did not eat after. I'd made myself a plate and sat and eaten it beside my son. And if Carol wanted the staff back in the kitchen, she was going to have to announce it to 22 people. She let it go. She was saving her strength. And I knew for what. Because Gary Whitcomb's office and their avenues were 10 o'clock tomorrow. And Carol Kovach never once in her life walked into a negotiation without softening the ground the night before. The plates were cleared. My pies were on the sideboard. And Carol stood up and tapped her wine glass with the butter knife. "Since the whole family is finally in one room," she said, "we are going to settle what Aaron left behind. Tonight, before dessert. You know what happened next. You've known since the beginning. But you know more than that now, so watch it again with me. Watch what I was watching this time. Watch Roger." When his wife stood up, Roger's hands went flat on the tablecloth, either side of his plate like a man bracing on a rail. Roger knew what his son had done for that house. He'd shaken on it. He'd carried it 5 years, one cut-off syllable at a time. And now his wife was about to litigate his dead boy's money over the pies. In the dining room, his dead boy had bought back off the courthouse steps. I said, "Not at the table, Carol." She came around the table. The chair tipped. The face an inch from mine. "You were nobody. You trapped my son. Everything he had came from this family, and it's coming back to this family." And I sat still, hands in my lap, one of them resting on the strap of a canvas tote. I'd moved from the coat bench to the floor beside my chair while the coffee was brewing. She wanted me to shout. A shout would have made me the trailer girl in front of the aunts once and forever, and made tomorrow's lawyer meeting a mercy the family did me. I didn't shout, and my quiet went into her like a needle, because quiet was the one thing she'd never been able to get off me, and she pulled back her head, and she spat in my face. Somebody down the table said her name. Sharon, I think, half rising. 19 adults. And one of them said her name, and none of them stood. And then she went for my son. She grabbed Eli's hand and hauled him up out of his chair, and his headphones hit the floor, and his hands flew up to his bare ears, and my mother-in-law stood in front of her church friends and her sisters-in-law and her grandnieces and screamed, "This little freak is not our family." Here's what the premise of my whole life came down to. She was holding my son's wrist. He'd gone stiff, eyes down and to the side, breath climbing. I could read the next 90 seconds of my boy like a page, and in none of them was there air, and the word was out in the room now. The door word, the one he'd carried to me in the dark, said this time to his face, in front of a crowd in his grandmother's voice. I stood up. I wiped my face with her napkin, folded it once, and laid it by my plate. I picked the headphones up off the floor and set them back over my son's ears. Gently, seals flush, the way we do it every morning of our lives. And I watched his shoulders come down half an inch. And then I closed my hand around Carol's wrist. Not hard, certain, the grip you learn from carrying things that can't be dropped. And I leaned into her ear, and 11 words, and I gave her the sentence I'd been keeping since 2021. Take your hand off my son. You're standing in his house. Carol let go of Eli like his hand was stove iron. She stepped back into the sideboard hard enough to rattle my pies, and her face went that tablecloth color, and her eyes went down the table for her husband. For Roger, come tell them, Roger. Tell this lying trailer girl. And Roger looked at his plate. He looked at his plate the way a man looks at 40 years, and would not lift his eyes to her. She turned back to me and tried to laugh. It came out wrong, in front of everyone. This is Kovach property, she said too loud. This house has been Kovach 60 years. You're insane. She's insane. I picked up the tote bag and took out the manila envelope, and I didn't hand it to Carol. I walked down the table and put it in front of Roger. I'm sorry, I said to him quietly, and I meant it, and he knew what I meant. Sorry it was here, like this, in front of everyone. 5 years of his silence coming due between the turkey and the pie. Roger opened the envelope. He put on his reading glasses. The room was so still I could hear Brittany's phone, still recording against the gravy boat. He looked at the sheriff's deed a long time, longer than a man needs to read a thing he already knows. And then he turned to the signature page of the trust papers, and I watched his thumb stop on the line where his son's handwriting sat. Block capitals, neat as a fuse box. The same hand that was on every card in the tin box up in her hutch. Nobody in that room needed an attorney to certify whose hand that was, least of all the woman who owned the hutch. Roger. Carol's voice had a crack in it now. Roger, say something. And Roger Kovach lifted his head at last and said to the whole table, in a voice they use up here for funerals, It's true. It's been true since 2021. The bank took the house. Aaron bought it back, every cent his, and put it in the boy's name. He set the papers down and looked at his wife and finished it. The boy you just called a freak owns the roof over your head, and his mother's been paying the taxes on it since our son died. The room turned. You could hear it turn. A chair scrape, Sharon's hand coming down flat on the table, somebody's long breath out. Aunt Patty said, "Oh, Carol," in a voice with 20 years in it. Donna from St. Stephen's reached slowly over and turned Brittany's phone face down, and that little click was the sound of Carol Kovach's whole kingdom changing hands. 16 months of sitting on Aaron's money died right there, in front of the jury she'd built for me herself. Carol looked around her dining room, at her sisters-in-law, her church friends, her daughter, for one face that would hold, and didn't find one. And that was the consequence, not the deed. The faces. She sat down slowly at the corner of her own table, in the chair Eli had been yanked out of, and for the first time in 12 years, I watched her try to make herself small. There's one more thing in the envelope, I said to Roger, not to her. Last page. The occupancy agreement. The trust letter, offering Roger and Carol Kovach the right to live in the home. $1 a year for as long as they want it. Nobody was being put out. I said that out loud, plainly, so the aunts heard it, and so my son heard it. Nobody's leaving this house. It was your son's kindness. It's still standing. And then I looked at Carol, small in Eli's chair, and gave her the only condition that had my voice on it, and not the lawyer's. You'll be offered plenty of chances to know your grandson. That word is never in your mouth again. That's the rent. Then I cut the pies. I'm not going to pretend it wasn't strange. 22 people eating pumpkin pie in a ringing silence. Roger with his hand over his eyes at the head of the table. Brittany staring at her face-down phone. But my son ate 2 pieces, headphones on, dinosaurs, in a row beside his plate in his own dining room, at his own table, though he didn't know it yet. And when we left, Roger walked us out to the car. No foil plate this time. And he shook my hand on his driveway like men shake when a debt's been witnessed. And he said his father would be, and couldn't finish it, and didn't have to. The Friday morning lawyer meeting was canceled by 7 a.m. By text, no explanation. None needed. The next morning, Eli and I had our own Thanksgiving. A day late, the way I think we'll do it every year now. My little kitchen in Moxham, leftover turkey on mismatched plates, snow starting soft over the valley outside the window. Before we ate, I took the turkey card out of my purse for the last time. Brine 14, HRS. No shortcuts. Calm down. It will be fine. And I taped it up on the cupboard door above my son's head, where a man's block capitals could stand over him the way they were always meant to. Eli looked up at the card and lined his 3 green beans end to end and reached up all by himself and took the headphones off. It was quiet enough. In our house, it was finally quiet enough. I'm Clara, and this is my channel. I love making these stories and sharing them with people across the world. If this one found you at the right time, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.